Hey, what's up guys? Today I'm going to give you a fantastic view of the mine that is located near my house. Just kidding. Very simple project today. I'm doing a little redneck fuel storage project right there, just so I can store some fuel cans out of the sun and keep them safe from wildfires or anything like that. The wind is perfectly timed. So anyway, it's not a very involved project, but it's been something I've been thinking about for a while, just to store a few extra fuel cans that I like to keep around for vacations or yard equipment, things like that. And anyway, I'm going to show you kind of how I did that, and then at the end I will try to answer some questions you may have on what my perceived benefits of something like this are to keep the cans safe. And I've added a little sign on the front to hopefully deter the few thousand people who don't watch this video as to what this really is. So at this point, you've seen how this little redneck structure came together and how crude and simple it really is. It's essentially just a concrete rectangle with a lid on it, but I'm sure you might have some questions as to what are the benefits I'm hoping to gain from a structure like this. And that's what I'm going to try to answer right now. So the first benefit, and probably the most obvious on my list, is simply just protecting the containers from the sun and ultimately the UV degradation that will ultimately happen from that exposure. Being that most fuel storage containers are of the HDPE plastic sort, while that plastic is very durable, when it's left out in the sunlight, it will quickly degrade, especially the Arizona sun, where we don't have much humidity in the air to filter out the UV exposure. So simply just keeping it out of the sun will elongate its life, and I'll show you a clip right now of one of my older fuel cans that I just left out in the sun for years versus a newer one that's probably 2 years old but has always had a tarp over it, and you'll see it's quite the contrast. Next up on my list is insulating from the expansion and contraction process due to the fuel and the fuel vapors heating and cooling. So I'm sure some of you have seen a gas can sitting outside on a warm day, and it looks like it's almost about to pop, like almost a balloon. Well, if you look at that same container when you go into the night, when it's cooled down, it will contract pretty greatly. Well, in Arizona here where I live, we can be up in the 90s during the day and get down into the low 40s at night. And that whole process, when it expands, the fuel and the fuel vapor, some of that vapor will go out and it'll actually reduce the amount of total volume inside. So when it cools down, it will actually contract the container to the point where it will cause creases in the container. And when that happens, those creases are eventually going to develop cracks and ultimately fail, and you might come out to having a fuel can that is, leaked half of its fuel out. And having them covered up in something like this will just keep that temperature swing maybe from being so great. I mean, obviously it's still going to be exposed to 90-degree outside temperature, but it's going to be out of the sunlight, and it's just not going to have that wide temperature swing. And I've noticed when I've stored them under tarps, even simply putting a tarp over it, I haven't had that expansion and contraction process happen nearly as bad as just something that's exposed. Third on my list is protection from wildfires. The concrete block will protect, give a little bit of thermal protection from, say, the grasses burning on the outside, and then the metal roofing and the metal flashing will help shed any embers, and hopefully it'll give it enough protection so that all that grass burns up, and I'll probably trim around there, but that way you don't end up having 30-40 gallons of fuel starting on fire. And the next benefit on my list is locating the fuel away from my house and my shop, and I think that's pretty obvious. All the flammable things, I don't want them stored right up next to the house in case they ever did catch fire. I just want to have some distance between that hazard and this shop and my house and all of the other random things that I built around my property. Next is theft. It's that simple, out of sight, out of mind. Somebody's not going to look over and see 10 red gas cans that are saying, put me in your vehicle. So it's just covering them up, and obviously that is part of why the snake sign is there. Some people like myself might actually see the snake sign and want to look inside, but I figure probably about 50% of the population probably have zero interest in looking in there. And the last benefit is just to have a little extra fuel on hand for me to be able to get back and forth to work. I work as a firefighter, as many of you know, and I think it's important that even if something does happen, I'm still able to show up to work and help my community, and that kind of thing. And that could pertain to someone who lives in a hurricane area or an earthquake area, and you really need to get out of the area. Well, instead of having to run to the gas station and wait in line for 2 hours to fill up that, a gas station that may be running out of gas, you could fill up at home, go to family members in another state, or whatever you need to do. So I think that concludes my list of benefits as to why I think this is something good to have on hand. Now I'm going to answer a couple of the what about questions, because I know there are some of you who always ask the what abouts, what about this, what about that. And the first one of those is going to be, what about the person who sees this video? Am I concerned with them coming up here to steal 15 or 20 gallons of fuel? The answer to that is no, because they're going to spend a lot more time and effort and fuel to get out here to get such a little reward of 10, 15, 20 gallons of fuel in their vehicle. And then with that comes the risk of coming out to a rural area where people like myself are very self-reliant minded, and I just don't think it's worth the risk. And then who's to say I haven't sugared any of those fuel containers or essentially made them into spoiled fuel containers that I know not to use, just for people who would tend to do that. So anyway, I'm not too concerned with that. I would be much more concerned with being in the suburbs or the city and somebody putting a container underneath my gas tank and poking a screwdriver up there and just draining my fuel tank like that, because that is very common in urban areas. And the last what about question has to do with someone asking, why don't you just go all electric, get an electric car? You already have cordless batteries, you have a power bank, my travel trailer has solar panels and a lithium battery, and I think all that technology is great, and I think it's definitely improving. But I'm also a practical person, and I still do see a very strong need for fuel. We're not cutting our need for fuel off anytime soon. And quite simply, I don't have the finances to buy an electric car right now. Unlike the government, I cannot print my own money, so I have to budget. But hopefully in the future, we will get to a point where it is efficient to do battery and electric on everything. But you know, there's costs with that as well, as the mine indicates by my house. All the lithium, cobalt, nickel, that takes an incredible amount of fuel. And the other thing I would say is that even if you do have an electric car and solar panels on your roof, most people who do have solar panels on the roof do not have a battery bank. They're usually a grid-tied system. So if it's in the middle of the night and you have a low charge on your car and there's a big power outage, well, you might want to have some extra fuel to start a generator so you can charge your car. So I still think it's even practical for those of you who might be going towards the all-electric route, which, you know, I don't fault you for it. I think it's great, and I hope it continues to improve. But I'm also a practical and pragmatic person and a realist, and I still do see the benefits to having fuel on hand as well. So I think that is pretty much it. Alright guys, well I think that's pretty much going to do it for this video. As always, I hope you found it interesting and perhaps it gave you an idea on a project you might be working on your own. As for the next video, that is the makings of a goat barn. You can see it is tied into the fencing project I think I did 2 or 3 videos ago. And it's got a couple lofts, and we'll be getting some various other things before I'm finished. So anyway, that's probably going to be the next video. As always, give it a thumbs up if you liked it. You can also check me out on Rumble and Odyssey if you would prefer to watch on other platforms. And I will see you next time.